We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including a potential trade we're going to discuss between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Plus, we have several updates on many players around the NHL from various NHL insiders, including some updates on Connor Bedard, Mason McTavish, Jack Eichel, Rasmus Andersson and his future in Calgary or lack thereof, Flames captain Michael Backlund, and the situation with the Pittsburgh Penguins and their ownership. Will Kyle Dubas be impacted if the sale moves ahead? We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have plenty to discuss here in today's video. Lots of information, most of which comes from a combination of Elliotte Friedman and Frank Seravalli. We have a new podcast that came out yesterday from Elliotte Friedman, and then Seravalli's had some more videos posted through Bleacher Report here in the last course of the weekend here, just to give some updates on some of these situations. But we want to touch on a variety of players, but some updates, contracts, future, all that type of stuff. And then the trade we're going to take a look at as well comes from the Leafs Nation podcast featuring former NHLer Jay Rosehill. We'll talk into that here in just a few minutes. First up, some updates. Let's start first with Chicago Blackhawks and young superstar Connor Bedard. We know Bedard is technically eligible for a contract extension. He's been eligible since July 1st, and there really hasn't been a whole lot of reports on any kind of progress or discussions or anything around his next contract. I know there was a point in time when a few people were, I guess, maybe trying to think that perhaps he didn't want to stick around in Chicago or anything. We have no reason to think that's the case. According to Frank Seravalli, he says both sides right now seem quite content to kind of let this third year of his rookie contract play out before they really get deep into discussions on an extension. I think it's probably, from the player's standpoint, I think for Bedard, it's probably best to wait. I mean, was drafted with a lot of hype, first overall pick, and really, to be completely honest and fair, I think he's done relatively well considering his age. Looking at what he's done as a teenager on a bad team, some people kind of give him a hard time for not being like a 100-point player or something already because of the hype that came around him. But that oftentimes doesn't happen. It gets rarity, right? I mean, look at even a guy like Nathan McKinnon, for example. Took him a few years to get his real production at a high elite level as well. So there's really no benefit from Bedard to jump into a new contract unless they're going to throw an amount of money at him that just makes sense not to turn down. But I honestly do think that this is going to probably be a pivotal year for Bedard to really break out. And I think we're going to see the same thing with a few other younger Chicago Blackhawk players as well, including the guy who just signed a long-term extension the other day, Frank Nazar. To me, he looked really good at points last season. I know his stat line might not show a superstar season or anything of that nature, but when I seen him play, to me, he kept getting better and better and better, and I really think that he's going to really break through this year, and I think him and Bedard could even do that together, to be honest. Bedard, I think, will be on a better version of the Blackhawks this year. Not that they're going to be drastically better. I still think they're going to be near the bottom of the league, but I think they will be a little bit stronger, and on top of that, some of these younger players that he's been playing with in the last couple of years are all kind of getting better, taking steps together. So I honestly think Bedard is most likely going to have a better year this year. I can see his point totals taking a step up. We know he's going to be motivated to try to make the Canadian Olympic team. He's been invited to the orientation camp later here at the end of August. So to me, I think he's got lots of reasons and lots of expectations to be really bursting onto the scene this year. So to me, it makes sense to wait, and according to Seravalli, both sides are quite content to do so. So I would be surprised if we get anything before the season starts. If he does start really hot and looks like he's really ready to really exceed the last couple of years' totals, Chicago may try to get ahead of that if he's willing to talk about things throughout the season and maybe get an extension done before the end of the year. But otherwise, I think it's going to be a little bit before we see that next deal for Connor Bedard. Now, Seravalli also weighed in on Jack Eichel, who we've talked about here in recent days, based on some other reporters. I think it was Anthony DeMarco of Daily Faceoff, wondering what the future would hold for Jack Eichel as well, given the fact that the Vegas Golden Knights have a tight cap situation. It's not that I don't think anybody out there would think that, the Golden Knights probably want to move on from Eichel. Nobody is saying that. Nobody is thinking that. And Seravalli's comments basically were that he thinks that Eichel might get, upwards $14-15 million, which is going to be challenging. When I was talking about this the other day, I thought maybe 12-13. But, he's also got another season. We'll see where things go. He's got a new, terrific, productive, creative winger to play with, Mitch Marner. Hopefully we'll see them on a line together. He's already won a cup there in Vegas, been a top-line centerman, really productive. Maybe he hits 100 points plus this year, and maybe he can command $14-15 million. We'll see. But obviously, Seravalli feels that as much as it's going to be challenging, that they'll do everything they can to keep him, that there's no desire to kind of move on here, and that it's more likely if they need to find money to make it happen, that they'll figure out a way to do that without losing him. That's going to be somebody else that ends up getting moved instead. So we will see where things go. But big number, according to Seravalli, is what his projection is for Eichel's next contract. Elliotte Friedman is also talking about Mason McTavish. Of course, that scenario is one that we've talked about at length this summer. And the fact that he's still unsigned is causing more questions than answers. But according to Friedman, he thinks that McTavish will end up being a Duck, that he'll end up eventually here with the Ducks before the season starts, hopefully, to get a contract completed. He talked about the fact that a lot of people were talking about offer sheets this offseason, and he thinks that McTavish's camp were looking for one. I think not so much that they necessarily wanted to leave, but sometimes you can use it as a tool as well to kind of get your team to match the offer, to kind of get your contract done, right? But he believes that McTavish's camp was looking for one, ultimately never came, and his reason and rationale behind it was he believes that most of the teams that would have been in a predicament to be able to offer big money on an offer sheet are also teams that are probably going to be lottery teams, and none of those teams are really crazy about giving up their first-round picks because it would have taken that or multiple first-rounders to pry him out of Anaheim, and given the fact that they might be in line to maybe draft Gavin McKenna or somebody else that's in the top part of this deep 2026 NHL draft, they don't want to miss out on an opportunity to be able to get that player too, right? So ultimately, that strong draft class is kind of causing teams to want to hold on to their first round picks, which is a big reason why the offer sheet game was quiet this offseason, especially around McTavish. But he does think that ultimately they will get something done and get something figured out. Now, Eric Stevens, who covers the Ducks for The Athletic, also had some comments saying that he ultimately believes that Verbeek does see McTavish as a core player for that team moving forward and would like to see him get signed, and he doesn't really have any, issues with him per se, that he would want to move him. Doesn't believe there's any desire to really want to do that. But he does say that when it came to other players that he did trade in the last little while that were younger in the same sort of situation, like Trevor Zegras, Jamie Drysdale, he said that he believes that Verbeek had, whether you want to call it concerns, doubts, whatever, that they would be, big core members long term. So I think this is a level of having more confidence in McTavish than those guys. So just because we've seen other young players kind of go down the path here of kind of having a tough negotiation and ultimately getting moved, doesn't feel like that's going to happen in this scenario. But again, like Friedman says, I think they're looking for an offer sheet. They didn't get one. The Ducks also had a lot of cap space, and teams knew as well that they would have a tough time being successful. So we'll see where that goes. A couple of updates on the Calgary Flames. One from Friedman on his 32 Thoughts podcast. Of course, they were over in Europe here for a few days doing the NHL and NHLPA media tour in Italy. And one player he did have a chance to speak with and see was Flames captain Michael Backlund. And one thing he made pretty clear, he says that Backlund, who has 1 year left on his contract, 36 years old, one of the few veteran players who stuck around who had expiring contracts after the regime change with Craig Conroy taking over as general manager, that he said Backlund definitely wants to continue playing past his current contract, and that he wants to be a lifelong Calgary Flame with the hope of sticking around long enough to play when their new arena is ready. So that tells me that Backlund would definitely be interested and have desire to sign a contract extension. He's 36 now. He'll be 37 at the end of the contract. We're looking at a couple of years before the arena's ready, so we'll see here if the Flames feel the same way And if Backlund gets his way, he'll be signing another probably shorter term, multi-year contract extension to remain with the Flames to kind of finish out his career, if you will. Now, an update as well on the Calgary Flames from Sierra Valley on Rasmus Andersson. Of course, he's been one of the most talked about players throughout the offseason in terms of players who likely are going to be traded. And the belief still is that a trade is the most likely scenario, most likely outcome here. But he's reporting again that the Flames are still very, very comfortable going into the season with Rasmus Andersson on the roster. So they do not feel pressure to figure out a trade before training camp starts or before the season starts. Ultimately, every year you go into the season, you're going to see some teams run into unexpected injuries. You're going to see a team or two that's maybe expected to be a playoff team or a contender of some sort, whether it be a strong playoff contender or a strong cup contender, maybe have a slow start, injuries impacting, and then you're going to have, all of a sudden be like, oh, geez, we really need a right shot defenseman, and they'll have this, asset sitting there that's going to maybe even get a value boost from the need or the aggressiveness of teams that may have not had the start to the season that they're looking for example. So at the end of the day, Andersson's value could even spike up after the season starts, given teams' level of desperation, you could say. Doesn't mean he won't be traded. I think they're going to still continue to have conversations around him. I still think that's the most likely outcome in that scenario. But it just, according to Frank, that there's no pressure at all from the team that they feel to get this done before the season starts. So we could see it, but it's not something that's heavily expected. Now, the other piece of news as well I want to touch on from Friedman's podcast was the Pittsburgh Penguins and their potential change in ownership coming up. Of course, we heard about Fenway Sports Group. This has been dragging on for a while. There was rumors a while back that they might be looking to sell. That was denied. We heard about the Lemieux Group trying to get back into being the owners of the Penguins. So far, they don't appear necessarily to be a front runner to be able to do that at this point right now. There was the family out of Chicago that is considered to be the front runners and sounds like they have an offer on the table here. And if that goes through, we could, wouldn't be shocking to see the ownership of the Pens change sometime here in the next few months or so. It's really difficult to say. We heard it's going to be somewhere well above what Fenway Sports Group paid for it, and they'll make a handsome profit, even though they've only owned the team for a handful of years here. But ultimately, the big update from Friedman on this whole situation, and I raised this question myself when we last talked about it. The last update was, I think it was last week sometime, when we heard that there was a serious offer and that this ownership change is something that's very possible to happen. But I wondered about the future of Kyle Dubas. Obviously, he signed a long-term contract, being the GM and president of the team. Of course, that's through Fenway Sports Group. Is that something going to be impacting his employment should they get a new owner? And according to Elliott, he doesn't think that's going to be the case. He thinks Kyle Dubas won't be affected at all, that it's just to be a smooth transition, and that we won't really see like an upheaval in staff or anything of that nature. It'll just be more of a behind-the-scenes change in who the owner is. But as far as hockey operations go, that probably going to see a status quo. So we'll see what happens there. But I guess for Dubas' case and the work he's been doing there, that might not be impacted at all by a change. And I also want to talk about a trade scenario involving the Maple Leafs and the Penguins. Now, this comes from Leafs Nation podcast, obviously, which features guys like Jay Rosehill, Nick Alberga, and of course Rosehill, former NHL player, played for the Leafs, and was discussing a trade that he thought would be really good for the team, and it involves the Penguins and the Leafs in multiple pieces here. He suggested a trade involving Nick Robertson. Of course, now Robertson's been linked to the Penguins before. We've discussed that here on the channel as a potential destination for him should he end up getting moved, signed a new contract with the Leafs, and was at the last minute able to avoid salary arbitration hearings. But as much as that's good, Rosehill still doesn't think that Robertson has a future, or at least a very long one, in the Leafs organization. Looking at their current roster of wingers, has a hard time figuring out exactly where he could grab a full-time permanent spot. And he's just not sure that, like I said, that the future is really there for Robertson. So he figures package him up now with defenseman Morgan Rielly. Now, of course, Rielly would have some say on his contract. This would require his consent or his waiving, you could say. But he discussed packaging up Robertson and Rielly to the Pittsburgh Penguins for Erik Karlsson. Now, the rationale here is that, like I said, he doesn't know that Robertson's got a long-term future. Obviously, Kyle Dubas knows this player well. It's been obviously from his long time as a Leaf. So there's a familiarity there. Weaker team, you can probably get more opportunity. Morgan Rielly, he says, as much as he's been a good soldier for the Leafs for a long time, ultimately in the last few years, like, he hasn't really been producing what you really need and expect him from a number one defenseman. I've said for a long time, I like Rielly's game. I think he can be very helpful and productive, but in my honest opinion, the Maple Leafs have just kind of miscast him, if you will. I honestly think Rielly would be way better if he was your second or third best defenseman, especially from an offensive perspective. He did have one really good season, I remember, a few years ago, but ultimately, like, he's more, to me, a really good secondary offensive guy. So if he's your second pair defenseman and he's there producing some offense for you, not necessarily leading your first power play or anything, I think he would be better suited and be better. That's to me what he is. But ultimately he's had to be the top offensive defenseman in Toronto. He's a great skater. He does have some abilities. I'm not saying he's no good or anything like that. I just think that if they could have had somebody offensively who was better than him and kind of bumped him down a notch, if he was your number two defenseman, either let's say they had a right, like Karlsson's a righty, right? Let's say that they had a guy like him there for a long time, and like Rielly could be like on that top pair. And be the lefty-righty scenario, or maybe they break them up if they want to pair them with more defensive-minded guys. Either way, like, no matter what you do, like, he's either on the top pair, but he's considered the number two, or he's on your second pair and like a 3-4. Either way, to me, he's just better suited for that kind of role. It means your team is stronger, deeper, better, all those things, right? So, would you do that type of trade? And ultimately, for the money to work, the Penguins do have to retain a little bit more of Karlsson's contract for the scenario to unfold to be successful. So they'd have to knock a few more $1 million, $2.5–3 million in retention. But if I'm Toronto, I'd do this deal all day long. If Pittsburgh would do this, I mean, they still get a veteran defenseman in Rielly, they get a young forward in Robertson, and they get the Karlsson contract off the books. I don't know that Morgan Rielly would ever agree to waive that deal and would make it happen. I think that would probably be the roadblock that would cause it. I mean, if Toronto and Tree Living and Dubas had conversations about this and wanted to do the deal, I would think Rielly would be the holdup. I really do. I'm not saying Rielly would never waive to go anywhere. I don't know that he'd go to Pittsburgh, considering where he's been elite his whole career, especially the last 6, 7, 8 years. Had a decent run of being a playoff team and has yet to get a Stanley Cup. I would think he'd rather go to a team that's more, better chance, closer to winning a cup than a team that's starting to bottom out and rebuild. So I don't see Morgan Rielly approving that. So therefore, this is unrealistic from that standpoint. But strictly, if you take away those clauses and just look, okay, if you're Toronto, would you do this? If you're Pittsburgh, would you do this? I think the answer on both sides is yes. I think you do, right? You get a veteran defenseman who can come mentor your guys longer term and a cheaper contract than Karlsson. So Rielly could be that type of player to help you along with that. You get a young forward in Robertson who's got some potential that you are familiar with to some degree that could thrive in a new environment. And then you move on from the Karlsson contract that you're not crazy about. So all in honesty, I think both sides do the deal. It's just the player in Morgan Rielly's case that holds it up. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think that would be a deal that would benefit both sides? And should they have those discussions and even talk to Morgan Rielly to see if there's any chance he would do it? Because clearly it could make things very interesting if he did. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll talk about it further in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.